Ever since the first video game film, Super Mario Bros., released in 1993, video game movies have become synonymous with disaster. But lately, something shifted. We're seeing more and more video game adaptations that are actually faithful to their narrative source. Are we in a golden age of game adaptations, or does this new wave of video game films come at a cost? Today, we're comparing two Super Mario Bros. Movies 30 years apart. As we examine these two films, we will also take a look at other video game adaptations that have shaped the course of video game filmmaking. By taking a deeper look at these movies, one thing becomes incredibly clear. Video game movies have changed.
What the f is that?
Reporter Richard Staten wrote this insane article for the Los Angeles Times where he actually visits the set of the Super Mario movie. One of the first things he encounters that is kinda strange is the directors would totally refuse to give interviews. In the article, Staten gets this great quote from Dennis Hopper, the actor set to play King Koopa. The directors won't give interviews? That's the smartest thing I've heard from them. That's the only intelligent thing I've heard that they've really actually done. Side note, the directors Rocky Morton and Annabelle Jonkel are actually a married couple. I just thought that was interesting. It was clear from the moment Staten arrived on set that the production was a total disaster. Apparently, rewrites came so frequently that actors had stopped bothering to remember their lines at all. The entire crew was basically left praying that the producer, a man named Roland Joff, would step in and rein in the film's co-directors. 1 year before start of production, Roland Joff was flown out to Japan to meet with Nintendo president Minoru Arakawa. The topic of discussion, Joff of course wanted to make a Super Mario Bros. Movie. At this point in time, companies had been offering Nintendo upwards of $10 million to make a Mario movie. Joff's company, Leitmotiv, was hardly big enough to match these offers. And to make his odds of getting them even lower, Nintendo had declined all previous attempts to get the rights. Nintendo's reasoning? Studios lacked a good enough script to bring Mario Brothers to the big screen. So what is it that made Joff's proposal stand out? Well, that's what's strange. Joff went to his meeting in Kyoto without even a script in hand. I went with a storyboard and story outline, Joff stated. I said, this won't be the story, but it'll be a story that contains some of these elements. I was improvising. Joff's plan was bold for sure, but there's no way Nintendo would accept his proposal, right? I mean, surely they have no interest in someone without a script, especially given that they denied all previous proposals for that reason. Well, it had to be the most insane pitch of all time because Nintendo loved Joff's proposal. That day, Nintendo would grant the rights to the Super Mario character for a meager $2 million. They were betting on the man without a script, which is a gamble they would pay for in humiliation. The first step in making a Mario movie, obviously, it's finding a director. This actually proved to be quite difficult, with several directors turning down the opportunity. But of course, Joff ended up settling on our favorite little married couple, Morton and Jonkel. Jankel? I don't know. With this trio assembled, production was finally ready to begin, and it immediately went off the rails for a few reasons. First, they thought the movie should be marketed towards adults instead of children, you know, the people playing the games. John Leguizamo, who plays Luigi in the film, wrote, "It's 8-year-olds who play the game, and that's where the movie needed to be aimed. But the directors kept trying to insert new material. They shot scenes with strippers and other sexually explicit content, which all got edited out anyway." The second reason the production was a disaster? No one working on the movie had actually played the games up until production. Which, you know, crazy idea, might be the bare minimum requirement for making a Mario movie. The third reason the production was a total mess, Joff basically refused to intervene on any of the director's antics. You see, he was a director himself, and he believed the co-directors should be allowed total creative freedom. This wasn't Snow White and the 7 Dinosaurs, said the producer. The dinosaur world was dark, and we didn't want to hold back. What resulted was the insanity that is the Super Mario Bros. Movie. If you've seen the film, you would know that strange is an understatement. The brightly lit Mushroom Kingdom had been totally replaced with the bleak and dystopian Dino Hatton. While characters like Toad, Goomba, and even Yoshi make an appearance, they hardly resemble their video game counterparts, like at all. And the same goes for the rest of the cast. King Bowser, for example, had been transformed into President Koopa, a fascist leader who had descended from a T-Rex. Princess Peach is nowhere to be found, by the way. Instead, she was replaced by Princess Daisy for whatever reason. And aside from some clear references like the Bob-omb scene, the world of Super Mario is made completely unrecognizable by the film. And when the movie was released, it was completely panned by critics and fans alike. And so the question remains, why was Super Mario Bros. Such a difficult production? What had led otherwise competent producers and directors like Morton, Jonkel, and Joff to create such an underwhelming, horrible film? The answers to these questions can actually be found in comic book movies. You see, after the success of 1978's Superman, studios scrambled to capitalize on the untapped comic book market. The movies that resulted were major ass and often had nothing to do with their comic book source material. You had masterpieces like Swamp Thing, Howard the Duck, hell, even Captain America got his own weird ass comic book movie. And unlike adaptations of novels or plays, these films often blatantly disregarded the source material and invented their own narratives. Why did this happen? Why did studios feel the need to make up their own stories when it was all right there in the comic book? The problem lies in formatting. Comic books were serialized. They were designed for you to purchase a random 30-page issue, get your fix of action, and move on with your life. This was unlike, let's say, a movie, which has a full 3 acts, a story arc, and all that jazz. It's like comparing a sitcom episode to a Shakespeare play. The structures are fundamentally different. So to fill out a comic book movie, studios often just invented their own plot lines. The result? Clunky, often downright disrespectful adaptations. What I just told you about comic books also applies to video games of the 1980s. You know how video games were at the time. Pac-Man didn't consist of complicated storylines or characters. It consisted of levels and stages, that's all. If you were, for example, to make a movie based on, I don't know, Super Mario Bros., you wouldn't base it on collecting coins and jumping on blocks alone. You'd have to create a story. And that's what they did in their own uniquely terrifying way. There's a great quote in that Los Angeles Times article that states, "The movie's mission had always verged on the impossible, transferring a kid's game from video to movie screen. Starting with a property instead of a story meant that you had to start from scratch. The directors were stuck without direction, which granted is their job, but it's easy to see how adapting Super Mario Bros. Was an impossible task. Despite the Mario movie's astounding failure, the race was now on to create more movies from video games. 1994 saw loose interpretations of both Double Dragon and Street Fighter hit the big screen. Mortal Kombat received an adaptation then in 1995, followed by a quickly forgotten sequel, Mortal Kombat Annihilation, in 1997. Similar to the Mario movie, these films all bore little resemblance to their source material. Okay, but then why make a video game movie at all? If you're not going to appeal to gamers, what's the point? At this point in the 1990s, Mario's popularity had eclipsed Mickey Mouse amongst children, and kids were at least familiar with Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat from their local arcades. Studios aimed to leverage this brand recognition to draw more viewers into their films. The movie would attract hardcore fans via brand recognition, but the game's content would be modified so it could appeal to a wider audience. The strategy, at least commercially, turned out to be a major success. Mortal Kombat grossed $100 million. But aside from that, this was essentially a dark age for video game adaptations. Studios were churning out films that sacrificed fidelity for mass appeal. Would this trend ever shift towards video game films that respected its source material and core gamer audience? Or would studios go in a different direction entirely? In 2001, everything changed. I mean, yeah, obviously, but I'm talking about the 2001 film Lara Croft Tomb Raider. Though the movie's content also deviates from its video game source material, the film was a resounding success, making over $200 million. Okay, so let's be real. What was so special about Tomb Raider of all movies? Rather than focusing on adapting its source material, the movie pours all of its efforts into its insane action. Roger Ebert wrote, "Lara Croft Tomb Raider is all about about the stunts. The plot is a clothesline on which the stunts are hung. The special effects are first rate, and the action sequences are genuinely thrilling. This would ring in a new era of video game film production, one that focuses on action over story.
If you're looking for another example of this trend, look no further than 2002's Resident Evil. Though it's peppered with references to its source material, the film is ultimately just another generic, edgy action film with a Resident Evil coat of paint. Series creator Shinji Mikami echoes this sentiment, stating, "The movies are entertaining in their own right, but they're not really Resident Evil. They took the basic concept and ran with it in a completely different direction." This would be the case for all video game movies to follow. You had Doom, Blood Rain, Far Cry, Max Payne, even Tekken. All of these films used their video game titles and branding as mere covers for generic action movies. Critics began to take notice. Peter Travers of the Rolling Stone wrote that Prince of Persia, for example, is all flash and no substance. It borrows the title and basic premise of the game, but throws out everything that made it fun to play. The disconnect between these films and their video game origins was becoming increasingly clear. It was downright baffling why these films were nothing like the video games they were based on. Now at this point, it would be a crime not to mention Uwe Boll. This dude directed like 20 different video game adaptations. House of the Dead, Alone in the Dark, Postal, Far Cry, Blood Rain. There's too many to count, honestly. All of these movies were obviously terrible and were also criticized for hardly resembling their source material. Boll was dismissive of this criticism, to say the least, once stating, "People who play the games don't care if the movie is exactly like the game. They just want to see the characters they know on the big screen." He was so confident in this stance that he actually ended up challenging numerous critics to a boxing match that actually ended up happening. He beat all of their asses back to back, by the way, which, you know, is crazy. Regardless, the problem with Boll's statement is that it fundamentally misunderstood why gamers were so discontent with his films. Yes, characters mattered, but by this era of video game history, characters were just one piece of the puzzle. While earlier adaptations struggled with adapting vague storylines and locations, this new era of video game filmmaking faced a new challenge: complex narratives. By the 2000s, video games weren't just rinky-dink little levels and stages. They were serious now. They had this fresh new concept never conceived of before: storytelling. Suddenly, it wasn't all just about high scores and collecting coins. Video games had stories and arcs just like a movie does, which makes it really upsetting when, for example, Resident Evil gets a movie and its story is nothing like the video games. The game loses its core identity entirely when the story is neglected. Even the main character, Jill Valentine, is replaced by an original character made for the movie, Alice. There was no reason to do this. The game already had a story. Why would you scrap that for a new one? While replicating gameplay in a film might be difficult or even impossible, replicating a narrative certainly is. Despite gamers' discontent with these adaptations, studios still largely prioritize spectacle over faithfulness. When will a film come and break this tide? Well, there was one movie, and I bet you'll never guess what it is. That's right, it's 2019's Sonic the Hedgehog, a film based on Sonic the Hedgehog. Now, everyone remembers when this movie was announced for one sole reason: that god-awful, demented Sonic design. He looked grotesque, all right? If you were driving on the road and you saw like this little hedgehog sitting in the middle of the street, you would not veer out of the way, all right? You would hit the poor sucker and put him out of his misery. Unlike our buddy Uwe Boll, however, Paramount responded positively to critics of Sonic's design and took a bold step. They, for the first time in history, decided to listen to the fans and rework the entire film. Sonic's design underwent a complete overhaul, and he was transformed into an appearance that faithfully reflected his video game counterpart. This unprecedented move, a studio redoing their movie to appease fans, sent a powerful message. Gamers were finally big enough to have a voice, and the studios have heard it, including Nintendo. After the disaster in 1993, Nintendo had become hesitant to give out their film rights. Former Nintendo of America president Reggie Fils-Aimé said in an interview that Super Mario movie from the 1990s left left a really bad taste in the mouth of our developers. I wasn't with the company at the time, but as I joined, I heard some of the horror stories. It was well known at Nintendo that this movie was bad, and there wasn't going to be another one for a long time. The future was grim for Mario making yet another appearance on the silver screen. That was until a collaboration between two men resulted in Nintendo changing their outlook on filmmaking forever. Illumination CEO Chris Meledandri originally met Mario creator Shigeru Miyamoto through Nintendo's work with Universal Studios on a series of theme parks. Meledandri, whose animation studio was owned by Universal, was desperate to get in contact with Miyamoto. The reason why? He wanted to pitch yet another Mario Bros. Movie. Eventually, he scored a meeting with the Mario creator. Miyamoto wrote about their meeting, saying, "When I talked with Chris, he said that he had read a lot of interviews with me and felt we had a similar approach to creation." And Chris was right. Miyamoto really ended up vibing with Meledandri. Shortly after their meeting, work had begun on yet another Super Mario Bros. Film. A few years later, on April 5th, 2023, the Super Mario Bros. Movie was released in theaters. Unlike its predecessor, this Mario movie was actually met with generally positive reviews. It seems like Miyamoto and Meledandri's collaboration was a success. I mean, the movie was praised for everything, from its visual detail, from its humor, to its star-studded performances from Jack Black, Anya Taylor-Joy, and maybe not Chris Pratt. However, there was one aspect of the film that caught the most praise: the references. Here's a couple quotes from critics for you. Variety writes, "It's genuinely funny with plenty of nods and references for fans, but also has a surprising amount of heart." Comicbook.com commented, "The constant stream of Easter eggs and references had me smiling the whole time. It's clear the filmmakers love the games as much as the fans do." Finally, Empire Magazine wrote, "The story isn't groundbreaking, but the sheer spectacle, references, and delightful characters make up for it." Illumination has taken the complete opposite approach of Morton and Jonkel. As opposed to neglecting the source material, they instead have decided to embrace it. But is this focus too extreme? Well, first you have to ask, what changed? I personally have a theory. Paramount's decision to change Sonic's design was a massive success. The film garnered over $319 million, which is almost double Tomb Raider. It was clear now that gamers had a value. A market value. The size of the gamer market had grown so large, it was now possible to make a film that catered exclusively to gamers. No need for a mass market appeal. And the Mario movie does exactly that. Every second of that movie is filled with an obsessive amount of references to the video games. It's almost blink and you miss it. From locations to music, from storyline to character design. The film mirrors its video game source material with remarkable fidelity. So gamers have finally done it. All of their complaints have amounted to a film that replicates the Super Mario games to a T. But despite this, I can't help but feel like the film is a little cynical. The truth is, this movie only exists because gamers are now a profitable market. It's designed to make money off of people's enthusiasm for these games. Is every detail of the movie designed to appeal rather than engage? One has to wonder, am I watching a work of art, or am I just watching a product? Brian Tellerico of RogerEbert.com echoes this. The Super Mario Bros. Movie fails to capture the franchise's essential creativity. Illumination's latest animated hit becomes their most soulless yet, substituting references to something awesome for the genuine craft of filmmaking. That is the core issue with the Super Mario movie. We gotta ask, what is it that makes a Mario game special? Each game, minus New Super Mario Bros., is a fresh and exciting experience, brimming with this incredible sense of wonder and discovery. But there is no wonder or discovery in seeing something you've already seen in the games 100 times. And that's exactly what the movie does. It can only echo what was already done in the video games. There's not a single thing in the movie that actually replicates the feeling of innovation found in a Mario game. It fails as a faithful adaptation, not because it fails to adapt characters or locations from the video games, but because it fails to understand what makes Super Mario Mario. And the Mario movie isn't the only film to have fallen in this trap. Last year's Five Nights at Freddy's suffers a similar issue. Think about the first couple things that come to mind when you think Five Nights at Freddy's. Actually, don't do that. Scrap that. What comes to my mind, however, is the mystery of the plot, the gloominess of Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria, and that helpless feeling of being trapped in a small room while demonic animatronics come beckoning to your door. Are any of these elements faithfully recreated in the film? Of course not. Rather than focusing on what makes FNAF what it is, the film instead focuses on referencing material aspects of the game. Sure, it's kind of cool that Game Theory had a cameo in the movie, but is it worth sacrificing the tone and feeling of the games? I don't think so. Despite my criticisms, both Five Nights at Freddy's and the Super Mario Bros. Movie soared financially, a lesson the film industry will not ignore.
Minecraft, BioShock, Borderlands, Death Stranding, Legend of Zelda, even Metal Gear Solid all have either film or television adaptations in the works. And given its proven success, it's likely these adaptations will take the same hyper-referential approach as the Mario movie. But this all begs the question, is it even possible to make a good video game movie? The requirements seem kinda strict. You can't ignore the source material, but you also can't over-embrace it and lose any merit as an original film. So is there another way? A way for an adaptation to honor its source material while also forging its own identity?
Cyberpunk Edgerunners is a great example of an adaptation that walks this narrow path. The anime, based on CD Projekt Red's video game Cyberpunk 2077, was released in 2022 to universal acclaim, boasting a goated 100% on Rotten Tomatoes. Not only does the show feature well-written characters and stunning animation, but also phenomenal storytelling. And that's exactly what sets Cyberpunk apart from previous adaptations. You see, Edgerunners takes a bold approach with its storytelling. Apart from some minor cameos from characters like Rogue and Adam Smasher, the show features an entirely original cast of characters. This decision to focus on new faces has a profound impact on how we experience Cyberpunk Edgerunners. By sidestepping the events of the games, the show avoids the trap of constant comparison. We can enjoy David Martinez's story without feeling like it's a watered-down version of V's from Cyberpunk 2077. And with this original storytelling comes a deeper exploration of the game's world. Aspects of Cyberpunk rarely focused on in 2077 are front and center in Edgerunners. We experience the desperation of street kids, the internal workings of a mercenary crew, and even the brutal reality of Cyberpunk's corporate world. All aspects that are crucial to the Cyberpunk experience. And appearances from characters like Adam Smasher only enhance their appearances in the video game. Seeing Smasher's antics in Edgerunners furthers his mystique and status as a Night City legend in 2077. Rather than drawing direct comparisons to the games, Cyberpunk Edgerunners seeks to not just tell a great story outright, but one that also enriches its game's world and mystique. The same can be said about this year's Fallout series. We all know the strengths of the Fallout franchise. You have the expansive wasteland, the diverse factions, and its iconic dark humor that permeates its post-apocalyptic world. Rather than trying to recreate iconic moments from the games, Fallout instead inserts these elements into its own original story. The result is a show that ultimately feels more like a sequel to the video games than an adaptation of any of them. Both Cyberpunk Edgerunners and Fallout point towards a promising trend in video game adaptations. At the core of a video game's experience is its unique blend of immersion, agency, and emotional engagement within a dynamic world. Original adaptations, by their nature, are able to embody the same spirit. They invite us to explore new corners of a familiar universe and see how different lives and scenarios play out within its boundaries. This allows us to experience the fundamental themes of a game through a completely fresh lens. Both of these shows demonstrate that recreating a game's feeling and themes does not necessarily boil down to recreating the game's exact content, but instead, true faithfulness lies in capturing the essence of a player's experience. That's why these adaptations are able to stand alone as independent works of art. Fueled by gamers' growing power as a consumer audience, video game movies have undergone a paradigm shift. While the earlier video game films were marked by a cavalier disregard for its source material, the pendulum has swung in the opposite direction, with studios now prioritizing an excessive fan service that panders to the growing gamer market instead of creating an original, impactful story. Anyways, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.